and I'd like to cordially welcome you all to today's symposium. Let's talk about dementia and culture, how we talk and teach about dementia in cultural and linguistic communities. And of course, every single one of us is in cultural and linguistic communities because we all come from some specific place, some specific culture or cultures, some specific language or languages. And it's a valuable thing to spend some time really digging into what that means for dementia awareness and education. So I want to thank you so much for being here today. My name is Beth Salzberg, and I'm the director of the Alzheimer's and Related Disorders Family Support Program at Jewish Family and Children's Service in Waltham, Massachusetts. And I'm also the lead for the Dementia Friends program in Massachusetts. I've had the privilege of working here at JF&CS for almost 8 years. And I feel so grateful to JF&CS for having been willing to take the lead on the Dementia Friends program for Massachusetts and for supporting the project that we're going to be talking about today. And many of my wonderful colleagues are here in the meeting with me, helping with this technology, helping to make things run smoothly, and I'm beyond grateful for you all. So I want to take a moment now and tell you how you can access captions and also language interpretation during today's meeting. So if you would like captions in English, then what you would do is move your cursor down toward the bottom part of your Zoom screen and click on the little icon that has two C's next to each other, CC. And then you can choose to show the subtitles at the bottom of your screen. And there's also an option there that says subtitle settings. And so if you would like to change the size of the font or the font, you can click on subtitle settings and alter how that looks for you. And I'm going to ask Margie if she would put a website URL into the chat. So if anybody would like to be able to look at the full transcript, you can go to this web page that Margie just put in the chat. And that way you see the interpretation large, but you won't be able to see the slides at the same time. Thanks, Margie. So we also have language interpretation during this meeting in Mandarin, Portuguese, and if you would like to listen to the meeting in Mandarin, Portuguese, or Spanish, what you would do is go to the bottom of your screen and click on the globe where it says interpretation, and then choose the language. And I'm going to ask our interpreters to go ahead and explain how to access interpretation. So Stephanie, could I ask you to go first? I can't hear Stephanie. Can people hear Stephanie? No, okay. So let me explain again. You just click on the icon that looks like a little globe here, and then you would choose your language, Mandarin, Portuguese, or Spanish, and then you should be able to hear from there.
Would you like me to? I can say it in Spanish if you like. I can translate it.
That's okay. I think we're all right.
All right, no
I think people probably have figured it out. Thank you very much. Okay, so these are the languages. So Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin are the languages that were requested for this meeting. We also have Dementia Friends materials in Russian, Vietnamese, and Haitian Creole, and we hope to add more languages over time. And I know there are people from many Dementia Friends programs around the country on the line with us who have also developed or are in the process of developing Dementia Friends in other languages, which is wonderful that is taking place. So I want to just say a few thank yous to Tufts Health Plan Foundation and the Lebovitz Family Charitable Trust for support for this project and our work. I want to thank Dementia Friends USA and Global Dementia Friends, the Alzheimer's Association Massachusetts New Hampshire chapter for their partnership. I want to give a big thank you to our speakers, and also to Amy Walsh, Margie Sokol, and Jonathan Jackson for really helpful assistance with the design of the project in this event. Thank you to our interpreters and caption provider, and finally, thank you all for being here and making the time to be part of this conversation today. So a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded. It is possible that audience members will appear in the recording. It's a very large meeting, so chances are you will not appear in the recording. But if you're concerned about that, you can feel free to turn off your camera, to change your screen name if you like. We love to see your video, so if you feel comfortable, please feel free to leave your camera on. If I could ask everyone to please keep yourself on mute, because of the number of people that we have here, it's very important that everyone stay on mute so we don't get a lot of background sound. So if you have questions or comments at any point, please type those into the chat box. And my wonderful colleagues, Maura Moxley, Margie Sokol, and Ann Muskoff are monitoring the chat for us, and they're going to help us during the Q&A period so that we get to as many of your comments and questions as possible. If you're having technical difficulties with the meeting, please put in your chat questions to Ask Tech Help. That's right up at the top of the list if you go into chat. And Sue Spielman, another wonderful colleague, will do her best to help you out. I wanted to let you know that the recordings and the slides are going to be available after this meeting. We're recording the meeting in all 4 languages. And I will also be posting the meeting transcript and the resource list. Hopefully most of you received the resource list from me in the last day. If you just registered for the meeting in the last hour and a half, you wouldn't have gotten it, but I'm going to update it with any suggestions that you might want to add, and then I'll post that after the meeting with the slides. It'll probably take about a week to get that all set. So feel free to send me any additions to the resource list by the chat function or by email. And I also wanted to let you know that continuing education credits are available. 3 contact hours have been approved for social workers. And I also have certificates available for nurses and a general certificate for other professions. So to get credits, you need to attend for the whole meeting. And then you need to complete an evaluation form that I'll be emailing out tonight after the meeting. And in that evaluation, you can check off what type of certificate you would like. So let's take a moment now and see who is here today. I'm going to do 2 very quick polls just so we can get an idea of who is with us. So first, let's see who is attending from where in the world. So I've just launched a poll that should appear on your screen. And I see lots of Massachusetts folks. Midwest is gaining. We have a handful of people from outside the US. I'll give it another moment here. It's wonderful to have friends with us from all over. Okay, I'm gonna end the polling and let's go ahead and share results. So Massachusetts is definitely the primary source of who's attending today, but a little less than half. But we also have Southeast, a bunch from the Midwest, Southwestern US, Western US, and a handful of people from outside the US. So it's wonderful to have you here. And I'd like to do another little poll. Let's see. So I'm going to launch another poll, which is asking about what brought you here today. And you can check off any options that apply to you. So are you a person living with dementia? Are you a family member or a friend, what we sometimes call a care partner? Are you a professional working with people with dementia? Are you a professional working in a related field? Or perhaps none of the above. Maybe you're just here because this is a topic that interests you. So go ahead and respond if you could. Thanks for participating. I'm just going to give it another few seconds. Okay, so I'll stop that poll and I'll share the results. So it looks like we've got a lot of, 3/4 of the meeting almost is professionals who work with people living with dementia, but we also have quite a number of professionals in related fields, and quite a number of people who also are family members or friends of someone living with dementia. And we do have some individuals living with dementia here today. And of course, people can be in all of these categories at once, or several of the categories. So welcome. It's just great to have you here. And I appreciate your giving us a little insight into who you are. And we're going to continue on. So this is what we're doing today. We're going to start by kind of setting the scene. We'll hear a welcome from Nora Moreno-Cargi, and then a story from Brian Van Buren, who's going to help us remember that this topic hits home for people, affects people's lives very personally. And then we'll have our conversation with Dementia Friends educators who've been working in 5 cultural and linguistic communities around Massachusetts. Then we're going to have some music and a stretch break. Jonathan Jackson, Stephanie Monroe, and Jason Resendez. So before we launch into that, I want to define dementia and make sure that we have a common understanding. Dementia is not a specific disease, it's an umbrella term, and it covers a large group of different symptoms, including memory loss, but also difficulty planning, making decisions, sometimes difficulty using language, sometimes changes in mood or personality. And the changes are significant enough that they affect a person's ability to get through their day. Generally, the symptoms get more severe over time. There are many medical conditions that can cause this group of symptoms that we call dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common medical diagnosis, but there are many others, and you see some of them under the umbrella here: vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, frontotemporal degeneration, Parkinson's, Huntington disease, traumatic brain injury, and there are many others. So, as many of you know, dementia is something that's growing more prevalent as our population ages. And the Alzheimer's Association estimates that in 2020, 5.8 million Americans live with Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia. And 16 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or a related dementia. Now, when we break these numbers down, we see some real differences. So Black Americans have about twice the risk of developing dementia relative to white Americans. Hispanic Americans have about 1.5 times the risk relative to white Americans. There was a large 2016 study done in California, which looked at many different population groups and found that American Indians and Alaskan Natives had a likelihood of developing dementia that was in between Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders had a little bit lower risk than white Americans. And there are many groups of people where we just don't know because their participation in research is in such small numbers that we really aren't able to estimate how prevalent dementia is within that group. When we look at all races and ethnicities together, we also see a big gender difference, with women having about twice the likelihood of developing dementia during their lifetime compared to men. So the bottom line is dementia has a major impact on all of our communities, and it affects some communities and families more than others. So with that, I would love to welcome Nora Moreno-Cargi, who is a good friend of ours. She's the president of Tufts Health Plan Foundation, where she leads the foundation's work in healthy living with an emphasis on older adults. And she is also the vice president of corporate citizenship for Tufts Health Plan. Tufts Health Plan Foundation has generously supported Dementia Friends Massachusetts' capacity building initiative in several cultural and linguistic communities. So Nora, could I ask you to unmute and say a few words of welcome?
Thank you so much, Beth. I am so thrilled and honored to be here among greatness, people who give their time and their efforts toward this really important cause. Events like these are just so valuable. They are opportunities to learn from each other, to share best practices, to listen about what's working, but also about what's not working. These events instruct us on how we can help each other, how we can be reminded that we are in this work together, that we have colleagues and collaborators who help us move forward. We are fortunate to have such a supportive community. So many of us know the challenges of isolation firsthand, have seen and experienced both living with Alzheimer's, their families, and caregivers. And so again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to especially thank Beth because she has been an inspiration to me from the moment I met her. She was willing to share her passion, her humility, and her commitment to advancing work on diversity and inclusion. And so to hear at the beginning of this session that there are like 4 languages that are being communicated through in terms of this material is just really exciting for me. Beth, your passion for this work has been clear to me since the day we met. I am personally grateful for your leadership and commitment, a sister in the cause. In closing, I want to just remind us that we've learned a lot during this really difficult time of coronavirus. It has uncovered what for some of us has been clear for a very long time, and that is systemic racism. Systemic racism is working. It has resulted in the health disparities of communities of color, but more tragically, we have seen disproportionate deaths in those very same communities. We're all hearing the clear call for change, and it is all of our jobs to change the systems that have left too many behind. We have to break down those barriers, both language, culture, point of views, experiences, and talk and teach each other about dementia in a culture and a way that resonates with the diversity that we see in our communities. So I know you have an exciting afternoon planned. Thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of our foundation's team and our company, Tufts Health Plan, charge on. Be willing to disrupt the status quo. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Nora. I'm so appreciative of your partnership, your sisterhood, as you mentioned, and all your support, not only for our project, but throughout New England, the critical support that your foundation provides. Thank you so much. I would love to now invite Brian Van Buren to unmute and join us. Brian is an Alzheimer's advocate. He's a board member of the Western Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. He's an advisory council member of the Dementia Action Alliance. And Brian's role today is extremely important because he helps us bring this home. We don't want this conversation to be academic. We want to always keep in mind how real people, real families are affected by our ability to make education resources, research opportunities, and connection opportunities available to people living with dementia. So Brian, could I ask you to unmute?
Yeah,
Thank you, we hear you.
okay. Can you see me?
Yes, go
Okay.
right ahead, thank you,
All right.
welcome.
Hello, my name is Brian Van Buren, and I am living with Alzheimer's disease. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I represent the face of a Black gay man living with Alzheimer's disease. It is important for me to be speaking to you today as a member of two distinct, diverse populations, the African American community and as a gay man. People of both these communities experience disparity and disadvantages with dementia, from diagnosis to care and support to opportunities to live well with the disease. African Americans make up 2% of all cases of Alzheimer's, twice the norm of the white population. But as a result, they have fewer opportunities to be involved in important legal, financial, and care planning decisions, and less time to communicate their preferences to those who care for them. I represent 3 generations of family members living with Alzheimer's. Hardly surprising when Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And currently there is no way to prevent, cure, or slow progression. I was diagnosed in 2015, and at the time I was working as an international flight attendant, and as a result of my diagnosis, I lost my job. I retreated to my bedroom for about 3 months, grieving and basically just giving up hope, thinking that I was going to die. I had the opportunity of obtaining a book called Before I Forget, written by a lady by the name of B. Smith and Dan Gatsby. B. Smith was the first African-American woman to grace a cover of a beauty magazine. She was an entrepreneur. She ran 3 restaurants and had many lines within Bed Bath & Beyond. They decided, well, what had happened was B was also a person who, on the Today Show, did cooking demonstrations quite often. And in the middle of one of her demonstrations, she paused and could no longer remember what she wanted to say. And so this was kind of the beginning of her journey. As an Afro-American couple, they felt they had a responsibility to write this book to bring light to the fact that many Afro-Americans are being diagnosed. The book offers hope, and it's kind of a Bible for me. It kind of guided me through everything. I did not tell anyone about my diagnosis because I think I was almost ashamed. So they were coming to Charlotte and doing a book tour. I decided I would go and see them. So Dan got up and basically did most of the speaking. And then after he was finished, he asked if anyone had any questions or any comments. And so I stood up and announced to a stranger, a room of strangers who I never knew, the fact that I had Alzheimer's. I broke down crying, and Dan came from the stage and embraced me in his arms and said, "I got you, my brother, you're not alone." And then he proceeded to tell me that how brave I was because he had not met anyone else who was giving a face to this disease, and how important it was for me to become a spokesperson. I took what he said to heart, and after that became involved with, like I said, the Alzheimer's Association, Dementia Action Alliance, and actually now I belong to 10 different organizations. I'm an international speaker. Last year I spoke in South Africa for their first Dementia Cafe. I have been on many publications, many magazines. I've attended many conferences, spreading the word and giving a face as an Afro-American to this disease. In the Bible, Jesus says in Matthew, "Nor do they light a lamp and then put it under a bushel basket. It is set on a lampstand lampstand where it gives light to all in the house. Just so your light must shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your heavenly Father in heaven. At that point, I decided to become that light. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I am just deeply grateful for your advocacy. And I know that I speak for everyone here in just saying that it's very inspiring to hear how you have taken a challenge that you hadn't expected, you hadn't asked for, and you are using your time and energy to help other people, and particularly to put a face on dementia for the Black and gay community. So thank you so much for sharing that story and talking about what it meant to you to meet B. Smith and her husband, and the importance of finding people who are within one's community when you're dealing with something as difficult as dementia. So I appreciate that. And if you have comments later on in the day, we'll be very glad to hear from you. So now I'd like to go through some slides to just set a framework a little bit for how we'll spend the rest of the afternoon. So the reason for this symposium and the 2-year project behind it is that dementia affects every community, but as we know, as we've been talking about, not in the same way. As you'll hear later, some communities face a higher risk of developing dementia. I mentioned some statistics, but we'll go into that in more detail. And yet, members of these same communities are less likely to be represented in research on dementia. And members of these same communities are less likely to receive a timely and accurate diagnosis, and often to have access to services. And it's so important that in our dementia-friendly initiatives, in our dementia awareness work, in medical research, and so on, we make sure that everyone is at the decision-making table, and particularly those who are not getting access to services to the same extent right now. If they're not at the table, that means we're not serving everyone, and it also means we're missing out on wisdom and guidance from some members of our broader community. So we all want to be on the road to improvement. We all want to make sure we're serving everyone well, and we want to make sure we're learning from everyone. And so today we're going to talk not about a recipe. You're not going to walk out with a recipe on, these are the things you say or do to serve this community or that one. But instead, we're going to talk about a new lens that you can look through, or maybe polish that lens to see more clearly. So what I want us to do is focus and refocus our lens so that we see things at 3 different levels. And here's where we're going to start. Anybody here today in this place? I hope all the hands are going up. We're all here on planet Earth. Thanks, Brian. I see you. And I'm sure, I think I can assume that we're all here, despite the fact that we're in Zoom land. So not only are we all here on this blue marble, but we're all the same species, Homo sapiens. We do have different physical traits based on where our ancestors originated, close to or far from the equator, in the mountains or the lowlands, by the ocean, etc. And we have some genetic inheritance based on our individual family trees. But under the skin, we are all much more similar than we are different. All humans are susceptible to the brain diseases and injuries that cause the group of symptoms we call dementia. So this is one level where we're all humans on planet Earth together. Now you see the boundaries of continents and countries. And this is the level where we're going to spend most of our time today, because this is where we talk about race, ethnicity, culture, language, the experience of migrating across national boundaries. But there's one more level where I want us to focus our lens today. And this is the level of individuals. Each and every one of us is unique. And by the way, all the people in these photos are dementia friends here in Massachusetts. Each person's unique, each family's unique. You may have heard the saying, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, because Each person is an individual first. They are not their disease. They're an individual who is living with a particular condition at a particular stage of disease progression. Their day is going a particular way, so everyone is unique. And if we want to make a positive difference in someone's life, we can't approach them with a recipe for how you treat people in their group. The individual level, this level, is the level of focus where we actually help each other, whether that is as a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a council on aging outreach worker, a resident services coordinator, a bus driver, a restaurant worker, grocery store staff person, a member of the clergy, and so on. So ultimately, we need to set aside assumptions and see each person as a unique individual. So all three levels are correct, right? All three levels are real. Yet it's hard for our minds to move between these different levels. And I think that learning to focus and refocus our lens between these three levels is important for advancing equity and representation. We need to pay attention to differences in culture, language, place of origin, immigration experience, the kinds of things people have experienced in their lives, discrimination, as Nora mentioned, racism. These things are extremely vital to pay attention to. And we are all humans sharing the earth. We have more in common than we have different. And we're all individuals. And that's the level at which we help each other. So now with that in mind, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Dementia Friends Public Awareness Program, which I run for Massachusetts. Dementia Friends is a global public awareness program operating in 66 countries, and it involves training volunteers to lead information sessions in their community. These sessions focus on practical information about dementia that every member of a community needs so that they can really stay connected with people in their lives who live with dementia. I'm going to show you a 1.5-minute video that gives you a flavor for what Dementia Friends looks like around the world. So hopefully this will run. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody, with the little audio glitch there. I appreciate that. So as you see, Dementia Friends is designed to work in many cultures and languages. But what I have learned running Dementia Friends for Massachusetts is that it's not enough to set up a program, kind of throw open the doors, and just hope that everyone will participate. I had been running Dementia Friends Massachusetts for about a year, and it did not look like the population of Massachusetts. I'm white, I'm only fluent in English, and I have a limited network. And the way this program works is that I train volunteers to lead information sessions about dementia in their community. And what I noticed was mostly participants looked like me, and we did not have a very representative group of participants. The problem with a volunteer-based initiative is that individuals and organizations and communities with more resources are more able to allocate time to volunteer in this way. So that was part of the issue, is that it was dependent on people having the resources to be able to volunteer. And it was also me and the limitations of my network. Oops. So let me tell you now a little bit about Massachusetts. So we here in Massachusetts are on lands that Native people have lived on for 12,000 years and still live on. Waltham, where I'm sitting today, is on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people. And today, Massachusetts is very diverse. This map uses the broad category people of color, which we know is very non-specific. It groups a lot of very different people together, but it just gives you kind of an idea that we are a diverse state. 2017 data show that almost 12% of the Massachusetts population is Spanish speaking, 8.8% is Black or African American, 6.9% is Asian, and 2.4% are people of 2 or more races. In 2018, 9.5% of the population of Massachusetts had limited English proficiency. So that's almost 1 out of every 10 people. Over 70% of the Massachusetts population with limited English proficiency speaks one of these as their primary language: Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, or Russian. And then there are many, many additional languages that make up the remaining 30%. So given that this is what Massachusetts looks like, the first step for me was to realize that Dementia Friends Massachusetts required me to work in an intentional way to get us to where our participation could better reflect our state's population. The second step was to obtain resources, and I was very fortunate to get a grant from the Tufts Health Plan Foundation and also to have support from JF&CS and our supporters for a 2-year project. And then the third step was about relationships. Several months of talking with potential partners to find who was truly interested and could make this a priority right now, and how I needed to adjust the project to make it work for the partners. So in the end, we found 5 partners and we began a 2-way learning process. Our partners are community educators in Black or African American, Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, Chinese-speaking, and Russian-speaking communities around Greater Boston. And from the start, the goal was that we learn from each other. So to provide Dementia Friends sessions to community members, but also help Dementia Friends Massachusetts learn how we educate about dementia in these communities and learn in general new ideas about how we enrich our initiative. So I'm going to give you just a snapshot of our progress so far. The 5 community partner teams have led 61 Dementia Friends information sessions, resulting in 655 new Dementia Friends so far. So over 650 people have participated in these information sessions. Now, what we never expected was that this project would also be about new technology. But because of the pandemic, we had to convert all of the materials, and our partners had to really experiment with platforms, including the telephone, WhatsApp, Skype, FaceTime, Messenger, and Zoom, as well as organizing physically distant outdoor gatherings. It's definitely been a challenge, and we've needed to adjust our goals, but our partners have forged ahead. They've been extremely creative and persistent, and they've tried lots of different things. You just see a few pictures here, and they've done an amazing job. So I want to just tell you a little bit about what we've heard from the evaluations that all the participants fill out. So at this point, we have a little bit more than 400 evaluations back, and 99% of respondents strongly agreed that their awareness has increased about dementia, and same percentage that they feel more confident and equipped as a community member to recognize the signs and offer support to a person in their community trying to navigate. And it was actually unanimous among participants that they strongly agreed that they're inspired to do this, to offer support and be a friend to people living with dementia in their community. And a slightly smaller percentage strongly agreed that they're likely to adopt dementia-friendly practices in their personal or professional life. I think some of the comments were letting us know that people needed more information. They needed more than a one-time session to really get to the point where they understood how to implement this in a more structural way. But the sessions really, really helped in terms of opening up the conversation, letting them know this is an issue we should be talking about, and building some basic awareness. And just to give you a few quotes from the participants that I thought were helpful in understanding what people got out of these sessions. We should have more get-togethers and talk about it with others. The workshop has truly been an eye-opener and helped me better understand how to help my dad with dementia. So what we know is that for so many people, this issue is personal. Either they're experiencing some changes in their own cognition or someone they care about is experiencing changes. Second quote says, I've learned to use simple phrases to speak slowly and listen with patience. So some very concrete skills. I feel inspired to continue sharing this information with others to reduce the stigma. So as people in various communities become more aware and educated, it's like planting seeds and they can really share what they learned with others. Likewise, this participant says, I know more now and I can provide support in the community. And finally, the session was useful to put ourselves in someone's shoes who is living with dementia. And the tips about communication and how to act really helped. And what we know is that sometimes when a person develops dementia, the people who care about them may start to sort of drift away and not stay in touch, not because they don't care, but because they don't know what to say or how to act. So just this basic information is helpful to keep our families and our communities strong. So I want to close by giving you a few pointers based on what I've learned about how to make my dementia-friendly initiative more representative of my community, which is Massachusetts. And I'm going to boil it down to 3 R's: realization, resources, and relationships. So the realization was I had to take on that this was an essential goal, that if I'm running Dementia Friends Massachusetts, I need to be on a pathway toward making it representative of our whole state. Resources, it's important to put resources toward it. And that's not just dollars, it's time as well. It was necessary to take the time to really talk with various groups in the community and find who wanted to focus on this issue for a while and had an appetite to take on this kind of two-way learning process. Resources are also dollars. It's vitally important that community partners be fairly compensated for their work. I think there's sometimes a pattern that larger organizations get grants and then they ask others to be on committees and to really give their time for free. And especially for small organizations, that's just not feasible. So we really need to make sure that we're compensating people realistically for the time and expertise that they're sharing. I think in this process, the practice of cultural humility is a very useful stance. And in the resource list that I've sent out and that we'll be posting with the materials in a week or so after the event, there's a link where you can learn more. But in short, it's the awareness, self-reflection that we all come from a particular viewpoint and that we need to strive to really listen with an open mind to others. There's a treasure trove of books, videos, podcasts, etc. out there where you can learn about different communities and you can learn about some of the factors that may be stumbling blocks that may make it hard for people to participate and to trust and to build relationships. And when you're more aware, you can start to address those and work through them. And then build relationships. And that means go to where the people you want to connect with are, where they're doing their own work, and support their work. So to show up for what they are doing and then get to know people over time. You know, it's important that we not kind of show up and say, I've got a grant application due in 1 week, are you in or not? But to actually build those relationships over time. There's a wonderful saying, go slow to go fast. I heard that first from Olivia Mastery, who's one of the founders of Dementia Friendly Massachusetts. But I think a lot of people have said it. And it basically means when you build the relationships and you build the trust, then things can move quickly. But you have to go slow at the beginning to set that foundation. Don't give up, keep going. And I could have had a fourth R, which is road, because I expect this to be a lifelong road. I will continue working to make Dementia Friends Massachusetts more representative as long as I am working with Dementia Friends Massachusetts. It's a process that never ends. And it's a joyful process because it is so wonderful to learn from people who see through a different lens than I do. And I think we need to see it that way as a pleasure and as an opportunity. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And I want to invite our community Dementia Friends educators to unmute themselves and to join in a conversation with me. And while they unmute, I'm going to just introduce each of them. So we are privileged to have Arnetta E. Beatty and Carl Byron Batty. Arnetta is the board chair and Carl is the executive director of Rounding the Bases, Inc., a nonprofit based in Dorchester, Massachusetts, that supports community members around training, education, employment, and housing. In addition to their work with Dementia Friends Massachusetts, Arnetta and Carl host social connection programs for older adults. They provide companion services and teach older adults how to use computers. They work with local farming efforts and distribute healthy foods to hundreds of households. I don't know how they have time to sleep, but they are truly wonderful members of their community and all of our community. I'd also like to introduce Irene Belozerski, who has been living in Boston since 1980. In Russia, Moscow specifically, she was an educator, but in the US, she obtained a master's degree in clinical social work and became the first Russian-speaking social worker in Boston. Irene has worked extensively with immigrants from the former Soviet Union as a clinician, director of resettlement services, and most recently as a coordinator of services to the Russian community in Boston through the Combined Jewish Philanthropies. Simultaneously, she's been maintaining an active private practice as a psychotherapist, also a very busy person who we're lucky to have with us. And next, I'd like to introduce Kun Chang, who is the Associate Director of the Greater Boston Chinese Golden Age Center, an organization that provides comprehensive wellness services to Asian older adults and family members, including housing, nutrition, day programs, transportation, and caregiver support. In addition to his work with Dementia Friends, Kun has been the president of the Chinese Folk Art Workshop and a project director of the National Asian Pacific Center on Aging for over 20 years. Welcome, Kun. Alana Dundon worked as a psychologist, organizational consultant, and human resources manager in Brazil. And I do believe we have some other friends joining us from Brazil today, so shout out if you're here. So Alana did this work before emigrating to the US. And in addition to her work with Dementia Friends, she has worked as a medical interpreter and taught chronic disease self-management courses with the Latino Health Insurance Program, which many of you know, wonderful organization based in Framingham, Massachusetts. Alana is also a longtime caregiver for a family member who lives with dementia. Jacera Carvalho is part of the resident services team of Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, or IBA. IBA is a housing, education, and arts organization serving a Puerto Rican community in the south end of Boston. Prior to working at IBA, Jacera worked for social service organizations such as Empath, Community Builders, and Central Boston Elder Services with a focus on underserved populations. Her passion is to continue fighting against disparities of any shape or form. It's great. And then last but not least, Frances Samedi Ortiz was born and raised in Bayamon, Puerto Rico. She has a bachelor's in social work and has practiced with adults, elders, and families in Puerto Rico. She is now a coordinator in the Resident Services Program of EBA with Jasira. One of her favorite thoughts is this: remember that we are all afraid. We have all stumbled, even the most successful person in the world. But this has only made us stand up with more determination and keep trying. So Frances, thank you so much for that thought. I think that's a great beginning for our discussion. So if all of you who I just introduced, if you want to unmute yourself, and those who are watching, if you want to put your view into speaker view, you'll be able to see whoever's speaking large on your screen when they speak. Feel free to do that. So we have a little bit under an hour here to discuss 3 key questions that I will be discussing with our panel. And for the audience, please feel free to put your comments or questions into the chat, and we will address as many of those as we can during a Q&A period. So here are the 3 questions. The first is, what does the term dementia mean to people in your community? And then we'll talk about what are common beliefs and values in your community about caregiving or supporting the person living with dementia. And then finally, what are some barriers that make it harder for people in your community to use services or get involved with activities related to dementia? So I'm going to start with Arnetta and Carl and the first question. Arnetta and Carl, do you want to give us your thoughts about what does the term dementia mean to people in your community, particularly before they attended your information session?
People, we had a term, we always said people were getting old and senile. And that was just, it was believed that was something that just happens with age.
Mm-hmm.
Many of our friends didn't understand what the word dementia meant. So they would say, oh, they're just getting crazy. As they get older, crazier things happen. And it was kind of interesting, being that I'm from the South, that most of the times when our parents started doing things that they hadn't been doing, we would put them, or some families would put them in old age homes so that other people could look after them, not knowing what the word dementia or Alzheimer's was.
Thanks, Arnetta and Carl. So it sounds like on the one hand, a lot of people saw it as just, this is just what happens when you get older.
Right.
Not really seeing it as a medical problem that needed attention. Mm-hmm. And then also seeing it as a very negative thing, you know, that the person's crazy. And there's some stigma with that probably that makes it hard for people to want to speak up if they're experiencing some changes. I got that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Didn't want them to be around the rest of the house. Didn't want them to be around for neighbors to watch them. So we put them away in a place where other people were experiencing the same things. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't become an embarrassment.
I see. Thank you. Irene, how about you? Any thoughts about the first question?
Yes, actually, I remembered that growing up, I heard a lot of proverbs, you know, like various sayings, popular, very common sayings people would repeat without thinking. One was, the old person is the same as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then there was an expression when somebody, an older person, began exhibiting cognitive decline or changes, they would say, oh, the person is reverting back into childhood. You know, so there was kind of like looking at people who have cognitive decline as losing their adult qualities, and with that losing their dignity and losing the respect. They are kind of not to be treated as equals, but rather with some kind of condescension because they are like children now.
Yeah.
The word dementia was not, like you said, yeah, it was not well known, neither Alzheimer's nor dementia. I learned about them only after I went to School of Social Work here. I didn't know this. If the term which is used in the Russian language to describe this kind of cognitive decline or condition has very derogatory connotation. It's, I think the closest translation will be feeble-mindedness.
Yes, yes, yes.
So people with that were called feeble-minded.
Yes.
So there was a lot of stigma, of course. When somebody began to show the signs of dementia, so it sounded like a sentence, that the person was sentenced to rapid decline and to be moved somewhere in the back room of the house.
Yep.
And kind of discounted. In Russia, they didn't have old people's homes, almost. They didn't exist. So the burden was on the family. And it was a burden because there are no services of any kind available. So it was usually, it fell on the shoulders of the daughters, take care of the parents. But on the other hand, the cultural norms expected that old parents will be taken care of.
Mhm.
So they will not be abandoned, and at very probably high cost to the family. They were looked after in the house.
Yep.
But it was very difficult. I remember I was already living here, and I had a close friend who lived in Moscow, and she was an accomplished career person. She worked. Her mother started having very pronounced signs of dementia, very quickly progressing. So my friend had to go to work every day. There was no choice for her. So she would lock her mother up for the whole day alone. And when she would come home, she was expecting to find horrible, horrible conditions with feces smeared on the walls and water running or whatever. It was a desperate situation, and there was nothing she could do about it. So lots of people have this kind of collective experience, and therefore the attitudes toward dementia generally have very negative connotations.
Thank you, Irene. I think that is such an important framework for all of us to think about and understand, is that really attitudes about dementia can't be separated from the reality, the resources that are available to people, that if people are not able to get the help that they need, that's going to affect how they view dementia and their willingness to talk about it. So I really appreciate your mentioning that. And here in the United States, there's tremendous variety from community to community, from region to region, in terms of what people can afford, what services are available, and not only services, but services in their language and that fit for them culturally. So I think that's a very important point that you're making, that we need to always ask, well, what is it that people are facing if they talk about and acknowledge that this is something going on for themselves or somebody they care about? And I also wanted to mention what you said about the word for dementia in Russian. And it's interesting because the Dementia Friends program has its roots in Japan. And when the public health department in Japan began to address dementia, one of the first things that they had to do was to create a new word, because there wasn't a respectful word in the Japanese language for dementia. So they coined a new word, and then they started this mass public awareness program throughout the country. And it was actually the word that was kind of the spark to focus on. So I appreciate your bringing that up too. Kuhn, I'd love to pass it along to you. What are your thoughts about the first question?
Okay, so we have the very similar term in Chinese. We're saying 老人痴呆症. What that means is old, crazy, mad, dumb, old person, basically. So that tells you exactly the sharing with the same as my colleague mentioned. So toward us, right now, we also try to change the language. Instead of using so-called the way we're saying, we actually change the word called 老人失忆症, more like a memory loss, more general terms. So people more accepted about this. This is what we try to do right now. To our community, I think the challenge to us is when we have some loved one have this, what that means to us, it is basically we're talking about, this is our family issue. Family has to take care of all. That means that huge burden to family, especially all family become very smaller and smaller. So as you know, we only have one child policy in China, or we typically no more than two. This is very common. So the burden to the family becomes very heavy in general. Second, also talking about long-term battle. This is something that's not going away, right? So we have to facing how to deal with this. Again, because we believe this is the family should take care of their own. We are seldom seeking so-called outside resources. In US, also the challenge is very limited resource available in our community. So this is one thing we feel much difficulty in our community to deal with this kind of situation. So the burden to the family, the burden to individual, also we want to contain this so-called the disease instead of talking about how to help them. So when we contain, could be we never allow this individual leave home, stay home. Someone just keep this person at home. So we see the life quality totally change. So this is something we have to learn how to adopt, how to change this mindset to open up all resources. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kun. Alana, how about you? What are your thoughts about what the term dementia means in your community?
Well, for Brazilian community, there is like what Arnetta said, is from part of aging too. And dementia is Alzheimer. They don't know exactly what other dementias. They just know something when they do a training like Dementia Friend. So the first thing when you say dementia is the people has Alzheimer. And yes, I agree with Irene because they are treated as a child. And in Brazil, we have a program on TV that calls novela. So every day has one different episode, and they show a lot about Alzheimer's. They put one people with Alzheimer on this show and try to talk about this. But I think it's a little bit, it's not real, you know. They put in some point that is more, it's not realistic. When you live with somebody has Alzheimer, you know exactly what it is. And there, so the people has a wrong idea what really means, you know. And in Brazil, if you want offend somebody, you use this term. You have dementia. So it's not okay, you know. The people doesn't see this as a health problem, one issue that the family has a lot of work to do with these people when you live with these people. I am living with my mom for 5 years. 5 years ago, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer, and she is in very, very bad condition now. And like Kun said, I don't have siblings, so it's not easy. And what I hear about my family is, you have to take care of her. They don't know exactly what this means, but they say that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alana. And I think, again, there's such an impact of whether members of the public, members of the community are aware and have some knowledge and understanding. Because when you're a family member and you're trying to balance your employment and taking care of someone, if other people don't understand, if they think, oh, it's just a little forgetting, you know, it's nothing, or maybe they have a lot of judgments about how they think things should be handled, it increases the burden so much. So I appreciate your sharing your personal experience. And that's just another level of where community education and community awareness has an impact.
Yeah.
So I'd love to bring in Jasira and Francis.
Hi, Francis will be answering question 1. Francis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all
Hi.
for being here too and joining us. So the term dementia in our community, in the Latino community, means like when someone is mentally ill or crazy, they like tend to reject them or isolate them because they do not understand what the term Alzheimer or dementia mean. So when Yasira and I started doing these Dementia Friends trainings, we were fascinated by the idea that the tenants and the people we were training could understand the difference between these, and some of them could get a really bit emotional because thinking about the bad things, you know, because they did not know what they were doing and what they can do now so they can improve to take care of the family or a friend or someone else.
Thank you. Jasira, did you want to add anything?
I was gonna do question 2,
Okay.
but I'll keep that. Pretty much dementia in our community, it's like when you're setting a table, you have you have your plate, you have your fork, you have your spoon, you have like a regular meal and a dessert. Having someone who has dementia is like having a broken fork that you cannot use, like it's thrown aside out of the table. So that's pretty much like it's not someone that can participate in any human activity anymore, someone you could hold a conversation with. It's just someone that just sits there like a statue and you know they're there. Pretty much you're discarded.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts. I think that it's upsetting to hear some of the misinformation and some of the stigma and some of the gaps in knowledge, because we know how that affects people in their real lives. It's hard enough when someone when someone's noticing changes in their thinking, that can be very scary. And then if the people around you may not be compassionate or may not know how to be supportive or may not know how to find help, it's just much more difficult to proceed. One comment that came up a few times was the idea of treating someone as if they were a child. And I'm just curious whether any of you found that through your information sessions, that was a topic you were able to change people's thinking about and how that was. So if anybody wants to respond to that, please go ahead.
Hi, I would like to comment on that. I'm not sure if you guys are able to hear me because there's a power outage here.
We can hear you.
Yeah, so my name is Mudassir. Again, I'm, I want to bring some cultural perspective from two things. I'm Indian from India, and also I'm Muslim by faith, and I'm a healthcare practitioner where I practice physical therapy. So, want to bring, cultural perspective, which is pretty similar to couple like the Chinese and the Japanese. For us, culture is highly driven by our faith, revolving around it, where we feel like the burden comes back to family immediately to care for them.
Enjoy my job.
Yeah. So that's what, but I think, in my personal opinion, I a lot of times it also depends on kind of the education breakdown and where they're coming from. I find like the community is more open to adapt and open to learn about it and adapt accordingly. That's what my experience been with working with my own community as I'm providing care for them and help them understand dementia better. On the note of two things that was mentioned, one about the theory of retrogenesis, that seems to be coming. I don't know, maybe there's some knowledge that people learn that, when they telling that they're reverting back to childhood. So I think that's interpreted incorrectly. It's, we like, in a way, we can use that knowledge to meet the person where they are, but not against it. So if you can interact with the person with the dementia by understanding where their cognition is, that would be in your benefit rather than looking down at them would be more demeaning, That's my perspective. Maybe there's some knowledge that came out and people were exposed to this knowledge, but it was not complete, One theory can't just be looked at by itself. That's my opinion. Maybe that was knowledge that came out and it's not complete and people are looking at only segmentation of it. And the other thing was, what was the other thing? I did have a comment, but I lost my trail of thought.
That's okay. Thank you, Mudassar. I think that's a really interesting point, and I just want to let people know, if they haven't heard of that theory that you mentioned, there's a theory called retrogenesis, which means that the cognitive functions that we learn earlier in life are the most enduring. So if a person develops dementia, they're going to hold on to those cognitive functions that they learned from infancy or from when they were children, to the point that someone maintains the ability to, hold on to a finger, to respond to rhythm, which can be in music or poetry, because those are some of the very first cognitive functions that develop in human beings. So Mudassar's making the point that there is a theory about human development and how that affects dementia, and that's one thing. But another thing is this idea that people become children again, and we know that they don't. They continue to be themselves, so they continue to be the adult whom they are. Yeah. And when people develop dementia, they have had a lifetime of experiences. They have a unique personality. They come from a particular context or situation. None of that disappears. They develop a brain disease, but it is something that they continue to be themselves, living with the disease. Yeah. So if we treat someone as a child, we're really not treating them as who they are. And it can really be very harmful to people, even though it's understandable why there is that confusion. Yeah. So thank you, Mudassar.
Yeah, but I just wanted to add, I think what happens is that, because, if you're diagnosed with dementia and you're going through dementia, you kind of lose ability to do a lot of stuff for yourself. And that kind of makes people, like the person who's infected with dementia, makes them feel weaker, like they lose their power pretty much as a human being. And the other person who's, taking care of them gets more power over them. And they're taking care of them, brushing their teeth, showering them. And I think that's where the feeling of childhood come out of it. Like, hey, I'm taking care of you. I'm your boss now, pretty much. Treat them whatever they want. And it can be frustrating for the person with dementia. And yeah, so that's why it's really good to get these trainings so we know how to deal with this.
Thank you, Jasera. I think that's a really, really important point. Go ahead, Kun.
And so I think that's when people saying that actually is the way we feel a little bit better to treat my loved one, because when you have a young kids like 3 to 5, they're so cute. They saying doing certain things, this is kind of nonsense. We kind of accept it. Okay, so that's the way I feel as a caregiver. They feel if my loved one, their condition deteriorate, this is the way we can self-justify. I feel much better. I'm taking my older one just like younger one. So we have much higher tolerance about their behavior about this. So I think this is the way we help ourselves as a caregiver to readjust my position, treat my loved one as kids. Unfortunately, they're not kids. So this is the way, is this a little bit different? I think that's the way I feel people how justify about this. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kuhn. I think that's such a good point, and it's an example of how delicate and complicated it can be for families to find their way when someone develops dementia, and that family members are grieving the loss of the relationship the way it was, and they're often struggling to find a way to support this person, just as the person living with dementia is struggling to find their way and to find ways to adapt to how their cognition is changing. And that's such a vivid example of how family members are not meaning any harm. In fact, it's an expression of caring, and it's a way of thinking about this person and being forgiving the way they would with a child who they adore and love. But yet it doesn't fit with who the person is. So it can make that person feel disrespected or not seen as an individual. Brian, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. I'm guessing a lot of what we're talking about is something that you've encountered. If you feel like making any comment, please feel free to unmute yourself. So I'm going to go on for now to the second question, but these questions all flow together. We wanted to talk a little bit about caregiving or being of support to a person who is living with dementia, and to talk about some of the values that may have around that, because we know that cultural communities really vary in terms of their expectations about, what's the right way for a family to behave? Is there a particular person in the family who's supposed to take the lead in providing care and things like that? So I'm just going to go back through our speakers again and start with Arnetta and Carl. And I wonder if you have any comments about that. What are some beliefs and values about caregiving in your community?
Oh, Black families, you had to take care of whatever happened. You didn't send your family members somewhere else to be cared for. You kept them home. A lot of what you're uneducated. You got somebody that'll wander out the house and just wander off. So a lot of places people had somebody in a room that was locked in a room, but that was their way of trying to keep them safe. And there was no education about it. So you did the best you could with what you had.
Yeah.
Beth and everyone that's on the call, as a young girl and growing up in West Virginia, we used to always say grandma was not feeling well today. Go sit with grandma so she can tell you a story. And as I grew older, I began to think that grandma was not feeling well. Grandma was feeling good for her age. She lived to be 103. And she could tell you stories from way back when, but at the present, she would forget certain things. So as I grew up, my mom started experiencing some of the same things. And as a child care provider for 20 plus years, I allowed my mom to tell the child care children stories about what happened to her in West Virginia. So we never really put grandma or mom in a house. They stayed where they were until they passed away. To me, that was a great experience because grandma and mama was able to tell us stories that we still live by today. My brothers and sisters and I, and her grandchildren still remember some of those stories that she used to tell. So dementia really never became a word for us. It was just grandma was getting old and she liked telling stories. Taking care of my mom, when she started to get to be about 65, 70, it was a struggle. It truly was, because I was working at home, which was not so much of a struggle, but trying to keep up with her because she was so vibrant about walking and going places by herself. But I had to think that that's what she was used to doing all her life, was getting out, going and talking to the neighbors, doing things she liked to do. So it took some adjustment with me to adjust my schedule because I was home. I wasn't out at a business. I was home taking care of my children and other people's children. And grandma was not only grandma to my girls, but she was also grandma to the daycare girls. So her telling stories to them was great. She was able to go back into what we now see is the bookshelf stories, where she could remember some of the present, but could remember a lot of the past. And they were great stories. Mm-hmm. So to me, it was a good experience because as I go on in my stages of life, I can understand what's going on with me and my husband, Carl.
Thanks so much, Arnetta. Thank you, Carl. That's a really beautiful story about how having everyone united and together, staying together, you can gain so much from the relationships, and that you know, people who are living with dementia, they might have certain things that become difficult for them, but they have other things that they can do, and they continue to be such an important member of their family and their community. And the bookcase that Arnetta was talking about, that's an exercise in the Dementia Friends program in the information session, where we talk about the bookcase as a metaphor, and that some of the skills for thinking that are really cognitively complicated and learned later in life oftentimes are the ones that start to go, but people maintain their emotional life, their need to be connected with others, and in the case of your family, a lot of long-term memories. And it sounds like that was amazing for you and also the children in your household to really benefit from all those stories. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Irene, how about you?
Well, I think that there are two interesting, different kind of processes I see. Generally speaking, as I mentioned, since there was no experience with any kind of services, the families and the social expectations was that the family is taking care of the elderly and with people with dementia. It was also kind of a matter of honor, not to give up on the elderly. And to the best of their ability, families were taking care of them. But when the Russian community started growing and expanding in the United States, the old norms began to change because they started absorbing the current different new culture. So I remember that probably 20, 25 years ago, Hebrew Senior Life, it's seniors, the biggest facility for the elders in Boston, started reaching out to the Russian community, raising awareness of the availability of the nursing home services. And first, I think the attempts were met with a lot of resistance in the community. It was shameful to place your parent in a nursing home. It was shameful, it was frowned upon. Now, 25 years later, this has changed dramatically. I think that Hebrew Senior Life has added a whole floor dedicated to the Russian language services now, and there is always a waiting list. And there are a few other nursing home facilities in Boston, or around Boston, Massachusetts, catering specifically to the Russian language patients. So the cultural norms do change. And right now, I think that the expectations are that the family stays very much involved, but the day-to-day care is relegated now to an institution.
Thank you, Irene. And I think it's really important as we're talking about this to acknowledge that every situation's different, every individual has different needs, and every family's different. And as you're pointing out, on the one hand, there was always a very positive value that it's important for Russian families to care for their parents and grandparents. On the other side of that, maybe there was shame if you couldn't do it yourself. And as we talked about at the beginning, this umbrella of dementia includes so many different situations, different kinds of symptoms. And there are many, in my work as a social worker for many years, I've known many families that have really struggled to keep their loved one at home. And it was actually much better for everyone, including the person living with dementia, when they found an alternative, either care to come into the home or a residential setting. And I've heard many sons and daughters say things like, now I get to just be a son, or I get to be a daughter. I can actually enjoy my time with my parent or my wife, my husband, whatever the case may be, because I'm not struggling so much with physical needs and things I'm really not trained or able to do. So every situation's different. So I think the point here is that values matter, and that as we're helping each other, we need to respect those values. We need to listen for them. Because if we miss that, if we don't understand the values in a particular community, we're not really going to be able to help and support that person. And we need to work against this stigma so that people can talk openly about what's going on and what they need, because then hopefully people can get their needs met, and it won't be the same for everybody. It'll be different.
Yeah, I want to add though that because I think there is still a certain degree of stigma or guilt involved in placing an elder grandparent or parent with dementia, placing in a nursing home. I think that many Russian families are trying to find a more acceptable compromise. There is a little kind of cottage industry, I think, which exists not only in Boston, but across the United States in major cities, where it's possible to hire a caretaker in the Russian community, because there are lots of people who come here on temporary visas or, on whatever ways from Russia to just make some money to help the families back in Russia. So these women are willing to take care of the elders in their homes, and the cost is much lower than if it were hired through the agencies or privately here on the open market. So it's one of the very, very common and very popular ways of finding additional help for the elders. I see ads on the Russian language social platforms, ads all the time, either asking for these positions or offering help. It's very popular.
Thank you, Irene. really interesting. Kuhn, how about you? Do you have thoughts on this question?
Oh yeah. When I was young, my parents told me you have to marry a right woman, not just looking to the outside, also looking inside, because the woman will change your life, taking care of your children, your parents, your in-law, everybody. So what that means, female is the major the caregiver in our community. I think across the board, everybody agree about that. Female is so important to taking care of loved one, include all three generations in general. Okay, so but who making a decision? Unfortunately, it's man in our community. Okay, I just went back to my mother-in-law funeral. So on the whole process, this is the very old traditional way. We have 150 family members attend, and who making decision is the oldest son making the decision. Now, who taking care of my mother-in-law is their daughter taking care in past 3-4 years. So that tell you what? That tell you female is predominant, taking care everything, but reach a critical point in our culture. Older son is in charge. Okay, sometimes not always in charge, paying all the bill. Okay, but it is person who make a decision and eventually involved with a financial arrangement. So I have to say, saying very important to us, to everybody, all the men, marry right more women. Okay. Second, in this part of in the U.S., because the language barrier, so sometimes some family they could not really speak well to communicate with the other caregiver, other healthcare provider or doctor. Sometimes they rely on their grandchildren who become the primary interpreter. Unfortunately, not all the healthcare providers have the interpreter available. So also, even they're available, it's not available all the time. You always need to have someone in your family able to help you to understand the system, understand about that. So sometimes the younger one, the grandchildren become a very important part of helping their parents or grandparents about that, to taking care of their family. Again, this is a family center care in general. So how do we work with this? How to help the family? How to understand about, we can seeking outside help. It is okay about that, but it is take time to learn about the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kuhn. Those are such important points that are necessary to understand if a person is working with the Chinese immigrant community. And I would think there are other communities that would find some similarities in some of the things that you're saying. But it's very important to understand that communities vary in terms of who is expected to take care, and also the role of younger family members as the go-between for immigrant families. I'd love to ask Alana if you have comments you'd like to make about community values around caregiving.
It's the same of Irene, like the people, the family should have to take care of your loved one, and they feel very guilty if they cannot, and or they do just because they don't want to feel guilty. And yes, the cost is one barrier too, because it's a lot of expensive to place them in a nursing home, and it's not everybody who has a good health plan, health insurance. And so we have to work and take care of people. So that's not easy. But the new generation, I think he is thinking a little bit different. I don't know, because we are here, United States, because when we arrive, we listen about this, about the nursing home more usual than in Brazil. And we learned that it's not bad things. You know, we have bad places in Brazil. So I think this make the family think, I don't want to put my father or my mother over there because the place is not okay. They don't treat very well the person who is there. But when we come here and listen how is the culture, how the Americans think about, we start to think differently too. But in general, Brazilian community think that you have to stay with loved ones until the end. Doesn't matter how these people is, um, you have to be with them.
Thank you, Alana.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to have that value of a family staying united no matter what happens with health, always staying together. And it also could be very hard for some families depending on the situation. It might be not a realistic goal for some families. And I just noticed there was a question in the chat about how people are paying for care. And that is a huge challenge around the world. It's a huge challenge around the United States. We're here in Massachusetts where we do have the highest rate of insurance. So a larger percentage of our population has health insurance in Massachusetts than any other state in the country. So we're very lucky. I think it's above 97%, but even so, health insurance doesn't pay for many, you could say most of the care that people often need when they're developing dementia. So, yeah.
And who comes from other country, doesn't have your whole family here. So sometimes you are very alone. Your family is really, really small. So you don't have too many people to help you. So it's worth.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also that when people immigrate here, they have a frame of reference. Their ideas about something like nursing homes come from their home country.
Yeah.
Important to be aware of that. Thank you, Alana.
You're welcome.
Desira, would you like to make comments on this?
Almost same as my colleagues already commented. The same belief that family is the primary caretaker. Usually they pass the responsibility to the oldest women in the family. Could be, let's say, if my grandmother has it, my mom or my aunt would be the primary taker, or whoever like who's older and doesn't have too much family responsibility, like don't have like young kids or don't have like jobs, someone who's already also retired from work, or also like I forgot his name. He said grandchildren also help. So pretty much families like just take turns. Say, hey, can you stay with her today, or can you stay with him today? Because we have to do something. They just take turn they pretty much babysitting the dementia person. And another thing too is that at times when things get really bad, they would rather choose to choose nursing home. If it's getting too progressive that the family feels like they don't have enough resources or they don't have enough knowledge and because it's draining, physically draining and mentally draining, they would opt out of family. They would put them in the nursing home. Yeah.
Thank you, Jasira. So I want to go on to the last question. We have about 10 minutes to talk about that, and then we have a little bit of time to take some comments and questions from the chat. And there's wonderful comments and resources being shared. Please keep that up. That's great. So the last question that we wanted to discuss is, what are some barriers that make it harder for people in your community to use services or get involved with activities related to dementia? So I'll start with Arnetta and Carl again.
Some of the barriers that we find in the Black community is that a lot of people are not aware. They don't, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it feels like some people don't want to know. They feel like they've heard it before 3-4 years ago and are not willing to come into the present. Where we're finding that dementia, Alzheimer's, and other diseases of the brain start early than what we first thought. They don't want to put themselves into even thinking that it could possibly start as early as 15, 20, 25 years of age. They want to label it as some other type of disease and not think about Alzheimer's and dementia. We've had a little bit of a struggle trying to get people to listen to our information sessions. But once they, like, say, Carl is listening and I'm the presenter, once he's listened, then he spreads the words by word of mouth. And now everybody wants to hear more. Everybody is understanding what is going on with that family person that's experiencing some difficulties. And the person that's experiencing the difficulties are learning more about what's going on with them.
Thank you. So it sounds like, there's a lot of fear, and it's natural. A lot of times people don't want to talk or think about dementia because they're afraid of it. Yes. And that makes it so much more important that the educator is someone who they trust. And I really appreciate what you said about word of mouth, that, sometimes that's more important than it being some authority figure, but from outside of the community. It's more important that it comes from someone who they trust and feel a connection with, and that maybe can overcome that fear enough for people to be willing to listen. And once they listen, everything changes because they are able to replace that fear with real knowledge.
And it's a good thing that my other colleagues speak the different languages, so that if we have a session where somebody does not speak or does not understand fluent English, that we're able to refer to that person and have them hear it in their language.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I think one of the things we've found, our whole group throughout this project, is our communities are so diverse. So yes. When we say, let's say Russian community, there are people in that community who are more comfortable in English. There are more people who are more comfortable in Russian. So we need to respond and be more creative about how we reach people, no matter what their preferred language or their culture is. Thank you, Arnetta. Irene, can I hand it to you?
Yeah, I think that, of course, obviously the language is one of the first things which come to mind, because if there are, for example, somewhere in a senior center, there is a group for Alzheimer's patients where they use music or whatever to engage them, it will not be accessible to the majority of the Russian patients, because all the everything will be in English, and the music actually will be the one they are not familiar with, because it will be coming from a different country. So the kind of like group services, supportive services for Russian-speaking patients with dementia heavily depend on the language and culture, and they're just not there. However, other resources I think are easily accessible, because it's mostly for their caretakers, for their family members who are fluent in English by now, and it's not a problem. What I think is a problem, and I have encountered it for many years in my professional capacities working with the community, working the social services, is generally getting people to learn about something important, making people pay attention to helpful information available to them is an uphill battle. When I worked at the Combined Jewish Philanthropists, we have developed a wonderful program which provides free information services to the elders and their families. It's called CGP Senior Direct. It took a lot of effort and a lot of time to just get the word out into the community, because I think that generally people are resistant to learning about things like dementia if it doesn't concern them directly. So nobody wants to kind of know things in advance. And when then something happens, then they begin to scramble to try and find information. I've seen it repeating over and over again. So community outreach is very challenging and I think very necessary.
Thank you, Irene. And I think your point is excellent. And it's one of those points that brings me back to our picture of planet Earth, because that really is human nature, I think, is to avoid difficult subjects, but then we aren't prepared. So thank you for that. Kuhn, would you like to give your thoughts?
Of course, no doubt about that, because the reason we are here because of language and culture. So this is the most difficult and to us, to everybody who serving the diverse community. So my general suggestion is, what do we need? First, building capacity. What kind of capacity we need? One, we need to have more bilingual, bicultural workforce to serve this community. We also need to change our value about that. What that means is paying more to those frontline workers, increase the value in the immigrant community. How do we value our kids? If they are lawyer, they are engineer, they are computer science, they make more money. Do we make more money as a personal caregiver? No. So that's something we have to look into this. Increase the value. Value is based on the reward, also based on the social level, social class. What kind of thing we have to change our belief about our frontline workers? They are the most valuable piece of the service sector. We need to value that. Give them reward about that. And we also very important how to work together, partnership, just like Beth mentioned about that. You cannot rely on mainstream organization who don't speak the language, who don't have the face like me, because we have to make human connection, someone we know, someone the face familiar like us, so we can make the connection. So the partnership too is important. Work with a grassroots organization who work daily in the community. That is something we have to look into that. The last things about that is sharing resources. Don't keep all the funding on your pocket. Sharing the resource, just like this project. Let the grassroots organization be recognized, being valued, also being paid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kuhn. This is such an important, there's so many important things you said, but I want to just underscore what you said about frontline workers. And as we're thinking about talking and teaching about dementia in different cultural and linguistic communities, we have to keep in mind frontline workers. Here in Massachusetts, 40% of our direct care workforce are immigrants, and a huge percentage are not able to make enough of a living from their work. They're very hard, very valuable work, and they require food stamps or other public benefit programs to supplement their income. And these are the people who are taking care of our most vulnerable family members. And often they're taking care of family in their home country as well. So these are people who are the hardest working people I've ever met. And we need to really think about the value and importance of what they're doing and change our ideas about where resources need to flow. So I appreciate that comment. Alana, do you have thoughts about barriers in your community?
Yes, of course, always the language is a barrier, but I will talk about Massachusetts. I don't know about another states. Here, we have a lot of place that help, that there has interpreter. And but the Brazilian community is a very, I don't know if I can say lazy for knowledge, you know. because for work, they work so hard. They work 11, 12 hours every day, 7 days a week. So they don't find time to go in one course, especially when they don't know anybody or the people doesn't have any issues, anything about that you want to talk about. So the people just looking for help when they really need, not just for to know a little bit more, and who knows can help other people and do some volunteers jobs, or they come to work very hard. So they work too much sometimes, even forget the family, the kids, and this is we are seeing that that's not okay for the relationship, you know, is changing a lot. So and the health insurance, of course, they think everything is related of health insurance. Most of the thing, yes, it is, but sometimes there are places that help you and you don't know, because you just leave, you go to work and back home. So they have a myth, you know, they believe in one thing and cannot open their mind for other ways.
Thank you, Alana.
You're welcome.
And Francis, I think you were gonna talk about question 3. Can I turn it over to you?
Yes. So some of the bad barriers that make it harder for people on our community to use our service is that they think they're going to be misunderstood or judged because they have the condition. It's like a stigma, even with the caregiver. When they know that they are in taking care of their mom, grandfather, or a family, they do not ask for help until somebody else see them that they are being too much, they having too much charge in them, and they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about the self-care they need too when you're taking care of a person with dementia. So we try to get them to understand this, because like Irene says, nobody got information until you are passing this. So we can put the booths, we can put the tables, we can put music, we can put anything about dementia, but nobody is gonna pay attention until you're passing this. In like I said before, in the Latino community, is a big stigma, because they think that they're gonna judge you, or that they're gonna make fun of you, or that, oh, look, you're taking care of your mom that is losing things, or that is getting lost, or that is outside dirty, and the people does not understand.
Thank you very much, Francis. Carl, I understand you had a comment you wanted to make, and then we'll try to take 1 or 2 from chat before our break. Go ahead, Carl.
We talk about the fear, but we don't think about the guilt and the shame. What do you want to think of me if you find out that I'm suffering with something? How is your opinion of me going to change? And that'll stop somebody from even wanting to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that comment very much. And I remember in one of the discussions that our group had, one person brought up the comparison to heart disease, and that if someone has heart disease, they don't usually feel embarrassed to admit it. You know, they say, I have to watch my heart, my blood pressure, or maybe I have to cut down on salt, or I have to take some medication or go to the doctor. But there's a different kind of stigma around changes in our brain, changes in thinking. And as you're saying, Carl, it makes it so much harder to talk openly about it. And then it's almost like a vicious circle, because if people don't talk openly, that's why I think, so Brian Van Buren, who spoke at the beginning, I think it makes such a difference to hear from someone like Brian, who is living with dementia, who is making such a difference, such a positive difference in our country. I think he said he's part of 10 organizations right now. You know, so a person continues to be part of their family, they continue to contribute and make a difference. They're still themselves. And unless we can talk openly, then this fear just grows and grows. So thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask Maura if she would check in with us. Maura Moxley is an expert in this topic, having worked for the Alzheimer's Association for many, many years and in other roles as a social worker. And Maura has a very difficult job, which is she's been watching the chat. And I'm going to ask if you have maybe one or two comments or questions that have popped up that you would want to bring up to the.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. So people like the presenter's glasses. That was a key thing. There are a lot of cool glasses of our presenters. So thanks for that. I have a few questions. We'll see what we can get to. Maybe I'll throw two of them out, Beth, and then I'll let you manage them.
Okay.
One, there was a lot of talk about dementia-friendly training for caregivers and people who work in the field. And if there were any, especially culturally sensitive trainings that people might have come across that include kind of dementia-friendly components. And a second question that was just asked is related to people asking repetitive questions with dementia, and how do we kind of, and thinking with a cultural lens, the question of what is wrong with me, and that needing to kind of manage that question often without really, you know, scaring them, and how do we explain dementia to folks that are getting diagnosed with dementia?
Thanks, Maura. So we'll talk about these two questions, and then I want to give everyone a chance to have a little break and stretch before we have our second panel. Great questions. So regarding culturally specific or culturally attuned training, I mean, this is one of the big questions that we're wrestling with. So the Dementia Friends program is one of many kinds of curricula that's out there that's being translated into different languages and adapted into different cultural groups. And if there are any people on the call who are from a Dementia Friends program in a different part of the country, you've developed an adapted version, if you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. Here in Massachusetts, we have our materials in 7 languages. And I know that many of my colleagues around the country have worked with different languages, and it's not just languages. You know, there's versions for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. There are versions for people of different ages. You know, the main point is we need to reach people in a way that's going to be meaningful for them. And Dementia Friends certainly isn't the only kind of training or awareness program. There are a lot of other ones. In the resource list, there were some links to organizations that have developed really good resources in different languages or for different cultures. And, you know, Stephanie, who's going to be speaking this afternoon, Stephanie Monroe, for example, works with a wonderful play, which is, Stephanie, I don't know if you're on, if you want to say anything about it, but there is a link where you can watch that in the chat. I'm just gonna look and be able to tell you the right thing. It's called Forget Me Not. It's written and directed by Garrett Davis, and it shows an African-American family who are dealing with the father or grandfather's Alzheimer's disease and trying to find their way through it and how it affects all the different relationships. So I think it's wonderful to see materials in the arts, not only kind of traditional training programs, because sometimes that is how you overcome the fear and get people interested to actually learn. Does any of the other panelists have a comment about resources or trainings? Okay, well, you can rest assured that in the resource list, you're going to find links to many, many good resources. And then to address the second question about repetitive questions, this is definitely something that we talk about to some extent in the Dementia Friends information session, and that it's very important to try to put yourself in the shoes of the person living with dementia, that that person is expressing a feeling or a concern. And, you know, there's a phrase, I actually heard this phrase from the Alzheimer's Association the first time: focus on the feelings, not the facts. So the facts may be, this person has asked me the same question 5 times in the last hour, but the feeling is that, first of all, they don't know that they've asked the question 5 times and they're expressing some kind of need. So what is the emotion behind that question, and can I address that? And what it might be is just to keep answering the question in a pleasant way. Now, for the person who's having to do that, that can be hard. That can be taxing. If you're a family member, it can bring up a lot of emotions to hear the same question again and again. So you need to get support. You need to have breaks. You need to have people you can talk to where you get support, because that's a hard thing. Does anyone else want to comment on that question?
If you have somebody that's doing repetitive, maybe you want to consider redirecting them with some sort of activity.
That's a great point, Kathy. Thank you. Yeah, so sometimes the person might be bored and they need something to engage their mind and have fun, you know, just like we all do, and we all need a challenge.
I wasn't asking about, excuse me, about repetitive questions. I have clients who always call me every day or two and say, what is wrong with me? Why can't I remember anything? And I have to keep explaining to them without scaring them why they are suddenly living in an independent or assisted living, why they can't drive. It's not repetitive questions like, what are we doing today? It's explaining over and over again that they have dementia and possibly Alzheimer's. How do you do that?
Thank you, Davida, for clarifying that. Does anyone have a comment? Yeah, I think that's very challenging whenever it's something that might feel like bad news or something scary, and the question comes up again and again. And there really isn't one size fits all. It depends on the person. You know, some people are able to take in more medical information than other people. But again, I think the idea of focusing on the feelings rather than the facts is a good guide. Because if you begin to explain the diagnosis and you see that the person is getting more upset, then maybe that isn't the most productive way to do it. And maybe the most productive is to say it in a softer way or to redirect. Maura, I see you unmuted. Do you have a comment? Go ahead, please.
You know, I was just going to follow up and say, I'm glad that Davida clarified, but I totally agree. I mean, sometimes it reminds us of our old days of reality orientation and how long ago we used to practice that in this practice. I think sometimes it's not always about bringing someone into the reality. We have to meet them where they're at. And I think, Beth, you did a great job describing it. I didn't know I was unmuted. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that, Maura. So thank you for those questions and for the resources that are being shared in the chat. And I want to give a break now because we've been on Zoom for a long time, and folks need to stand up and move around, get a drink of water, or whatever they need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put on our rolling slideshow of wonderful photos from Dementia Friends sessions, and I'm going to try to put on the music again. We put a playlist together with contributions from all of our community partners. I'm going to try to make that play. And then we'll come back at 3:15 and I will introduce our national leaders who are going to lead a discussion for the last part of the day. So please plan to come back at 3:15.